Hi! If you are new here, I'm Kat and I like to talk about crimes, investigations, missing peoples and all these kind of things. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. Also make sure you hit the notification bell so you are the first one to know about any new videos I upload. Make sure you like and share the video. For my returning subscribers and viewers, I would like to thank you so much for all the continuous support and for all those comments. Thank you. And today I want to talk to you about Operation Grange. But before we do that, here is the disclaimer. I do not mean to be disrespectful to anyone I talk about in this video. The video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. The information I take is from the internet and I compile these informations and make a video. From the video you guys are more than welcome to draw your own conclusions. Thank you. We've all heard by now of all those millions of pounds spent out of taxpayers' money on Operation Grange, and it's an appalling figure to say the least. It's been 13 years since Madeleine Mccann disappeared and the Met Police have spent tons of money for her search. The Met Police confirmed the amount spent since 2011 up to April 2020 is just over £12 million. However, honestly, I am inclined to believe that the real amount might even go over the 13 million mark. You know, Scotland Yard applies for funding every 6 months, but it's understood that in February of this year, the Home Office received details on the anticipated spending of Operation Grange for 2020-2021. Just last year in June, they were given £300,000. And this is what our lovely Clarence Mitchell had to say about it, and I quote, "It is good news that the Met Police are seeking a new budget to continue the search for Madeleine." But of course, how can it not be good news for them? Right? This is like, this is like a high-paid salary, but without actually having a job. It's like a project which needs to be seen through, but the reward is there without the project being completed. Something in the likes of that. Commissioner Cressida Dick previously said, and I quote, "We have active lines of inquiries and I think the public would expect us to see those through. A very small team continues to work on this case with Portuguese colleagues and we have put in an application to the Home Office for further funding." Oh boy, dear Commissioner. I honestly don't think for a second that the public would want to see those inquiries through, because it's all a sham. Really, it's a sham. There's no inquiry to see through unless it involves the parents. We've all seen it and we keep seeing it time and time again. You don't know where else to look, just to avoid looking at the obvious. Next thing we know, we'll be reading in the newspapers that a little green alien in his UFO kingdom Madeleine and she's there locked up on Mars. Or even better, Doctor Who took her in his police box and they flew away in a different time and space. Don't think that I'm actually making fun of Madeleine's case, but honestly, the way this has been handled over the years, it all sounds so ridiculous already. It's ridiculous. I think we've had enough. What we see in the media is the same story, but with a different spin. Nothing new to what we didn't know before. And again, I have to disagree. I don't think that the small team works with the Portuguese colleagues. If they would, the case would have been solved in 2007. And it all started with Tony Blair, the Prime Minister at the time of Madeleine's disappearance. Then carried on to Gordon Brown, David Cameron, Theresa May and Boris Johnson. So here we have 5 prime ministers who are just not stopping this funding. It just carries on from one to another. So if you try to hold someone accountable, you can't really do it, because by passing it from a prime minister to another, none of them actually take responsibility. And you know what, I think they're just like, oh, you know what, let's just leave the next prime minister to deal with this. I'll just keep my hands clean and I will just approve more funding. Maybe it's only just a piece of paper being passed from one desk to another and only needs a stamp of approval. And this is the reality. Although it may seem unreal, but this is a very, very expensive piece of paper if you ask me. This piece of paper costs millions when the stamp is right there pressed on it. There are loads of opinions circulating on social media that the McCanns were cleared by the Portuguese police. But I say it again and I repeat myself, that is not true. They have not been cleared. In 2008, the Portuguese police shelved the investigation, but this does not mean that the McCanns were ever cleared as suspects, and this doesn't mean that the investigation is closed. Just the same as it doesn't mean that Amaral was removed because of incompetency or any of his past cases. He was removed because of political pressure. The fact that he had badmouthed the British police to a reporter was the excuse needed for him to be removed. I think all they did was waiting for him to do something so they could use it against him, and it worked wonders. And so many people believe he was incompetent, but he wasn't. He did more than the British police will ever do in Madeleine's case, and not because they are incompetent. No, I don't want you believing for a second that I am of the opinion the British police is incompetent, because this is not my belief. However, in Madeleine's disappearance, they are only allowed to pursue certain avenues. Their hands are tied in what seems to be a political fiasco. Everybody has a boss, everybody has to answer to a higher up person, and if they don't like it and leave, very soon another replacement can be sent who will follow the rules. I mean, honestly and quite sadly, it's just how it works. The Portuguese Attorney General ruled two possibilities of what happened to Madeleine. She died in apartment 5A and the parents were involved, or she may have been abducted. Even if the McCann status as formal suspects ended, they were never cleared as they have claimed. They were not cleared. At the same time, in 2008, the Portuguese police made public around 85% of the police investigation documents in the case, which are also known as the PJ files. The documents suggest Madeleine had died in the McCann's apartment and they had covered up her death by faking an abduction. The evidence included 17 alerts of 2 British police sniffer dogs, 12 to the odor of a corpse and 5 to blood or body fluids, found in 12 locations or on items related to the McCanns and their apartment. There was also evidence that the McCanns and their friends had contradicted themselves and changed their stories on many various occasions. And there is still 15% which the PJ didn't disclose. And I really think that these documents prove the parents' guilt. There is a reason, and a really good reason, why they have not been made public. It's not surprising the McCanns tried to get their hands on the files under the pretext the files might contain vital clues as to what happened to Madeleine. But of course, in my opinion, those vital clues might be their involvement in Madeleine's disappearance. I have never heard parents of missing children to request files from a police investigation. The McCanns tried so hard to get these files that they even went to the High Court in 2007, but of course they lost and they were only given access to 11 of the files out of hundreds. And after the PJ released the 85% of the files to the public, the McCanns tried again in 2008 in court to see the files which have not been released. You know what? There is a lot of determination there. And it doesn't seem to me it's a determination of parents concerned with finding their daughter. It seems more likely they want to get those files to see if there is anything that would incriminate them and find a completely innocent explanation for that, as Clarence Mitchell mentioned in an interview. In 2009, the McCanns complained no police force is looking for Madeleine and they wanted the British police to make a review of the case. They persuaded the then Labour Home Secretary Alan Johnson, who in turn commissioned Jim Gamble, the head of COP at the time, to see if a review would be possible. Even COP says the first thing you would do in a child's disappearance is to investigate the parents, because in most of these cases the parents are responsible. But obviously that's not the case with the McCanns, is it? They are the ones which are out of the norm. They are the ones where the law doesn't seem to apply. Going now to 2010. Labour lost the elections and the Conservative MP Theresa May became Home Secretary. At first, Theresa May refused a review of the case. But of course that things will not stay like that. The McCanns, friends with Jim Gamble, complained about May's refusal publicly. Theresa May then, she reorganizes key police forces and puts CEOP under the control of a top-level national crime agency. After protests from Jim Gamble and the McCanns, Jim Gamble threatens to resign, but probably he didn't expect that Theresa May accepts his resignation. Don't worry guys, please stay with me because it will all be connected. Just a bit more patience. You've heard of Rupert Murdoch, right? He owns The Sun, The Times, Sunday Times and Sky News. He used to own News of the World as well. See where I'm going with this? Okay, in 2008, Clarence Mitchell starts working part-time for Rupert Murdoch's son-in-law, Matthew Fraud, in his Fraud Communications PR company. In 2009, Murdoch meets David Cameron on his yacht in the Mediterranean. But pay attention to this. Very soon after the meeting, Murdoch backs up the Conservatives in the newspapers instead of the Labour. But Murdoch asks Cameron to give him control of Sky B, which is now known as Sky, in exchange for helping him win the general elections. And he did. Cameron then makes the ex-editor of Murdoch's News of the World his own director of communications. Then they choose Clarence Mitchell as Colson's deputy. Hold on. Colson was on and off in a long relationship with none other than, ladies and gentlemen, Rebecca Brooks, who was at the time the CEO of Murdoch's international news empire. See how it's all connecting? His newspapers have published over the years many articles with sightings of Madeleine, and the only reason was that each front story page with Madeleine would gain them readership in the tens of thousands, which of course in turn would make them even more money. We know Kate writes her book in 2010 and publishes the book on May 2011, on the 14th anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance. You know what, guys, I still really can't get over the fact that the McCanns arranged for anniversaries of their daughter's disappearance. This is so unusual, really. And I believe that they were also looking to make this like a public holiday, or I don't know, anyway, a Madeleine's Day, I think. But the same book of Kate's, serialized in Murdoch's Sun newspaper for around £1 million, but the big but is the McCanns allegedly only agreed to serialize the book if and only if they would push for a case review, and of course any news articles wouldn't be against the McCanns. Even now, Theresa May still refuses a review, but then Rebecca Brooks gets involved. It was obviously in her best interest in terms of the serialization of the book. As reported on BBC's Panorama program, and according to some sources inside Number 10, Rebecca Brooks gets in touch with Cameron and tells him she will run a week of bad headlines about Theresa May if he didn't agree to a review. Although I don't think that this is the reason why Cameron agreed, but you'll find out in a moment. David Cameron and Rebecca Brooks were very friendly with each other. They lived near each other in the Cotswolds. They even went horse riding together. They even went to each other's parties. So of course David Cameron gave in and agreed to the review. All this review thing started off weird as it is. Usually the funding request would go from the small police force, and in this case would be Leicestershire Police, being that the McCanns live there. And then this would go to the Home Office, and the request would only be made in exceptional circumstances when the police doesn't have the funds locally. But the review of this case request came from the Home Office to the Metropolitan Police. When asked of them, the Metropolitan Police did say they understand they are a big police force with resources, but it wouldn't be fair on the taxpayers the Met to spend the resources on a missing child's case when the McCanns are from Leicestershire and the child were missing in Portugal. However, the Met agreed as long as the funding came from the Home Office. But we need to get back to David Cameron for a second, because this review and how the public would see it was well planned and orchestrated in advance, in my opinion. The way it went was, the McCanns wrote a letter to the Sun, right? The next day, the Sun publishes the letter and begs the Prime Minister to grant a review. The day after that, Cameron agrees to grant a review and asks Theresa May to set it up. Theresa May in turn told the then Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Paul Stevenson to set it up, and he named it Operation Grange. Looking at what I just mentioned, it's quite clear to me Rebecca Brooks agreed with David Cameron for the review behind closed doors, but publicly it had to start somewhere without seeming anyone would be involved, right? So what are they doing? They arrange with the McCanns to send a letter, which then gets published. Theresa May sees it, the British public see it, everyone is now sympathetic to the parents, and to save face with the public, Theresa May will have to agree. But most importantly, David Cameron would have the justification necessary to go ahead with the review without arguments here or there. This is what I think. And also, I found some things, and I don't know if it's got anything to do with anything, but Grange is a significant term in Freemasonry. There is a Masonic hall in Grange-over-Sands, a town on the Cumbrian coast, and also the Grange came into being in 1867 because of the vision of Oliver Hudson Kelley, a Minnesota farmer and activist. He had long held that farmers, because of their independent and scattered nature, needed a national organization which would represent them, much as unions were beginning to do for industrial workers. Farmers were at the mercy of merchants for both needed farm supplies and for marketing their crops. Railroads and warehouse companies were taking advantage of farmers as well. Okay, that's it for the history lesson. And now let's get back to Operation Grange. How it goes is, every police review or investigation has an official brief, right? Also known as a remit. 7 months after Operation Grange is set up, the Met police officers agree on the review's remit. Drawn up by Detective Chief Superintendent Hamish Campbell, it said, and I quote, "The investigative review is intended to collate, record and analyze what has gone before. It is to examine the case and seek to determine, as if the abduction occurred in the UK, what additional new investigative approaches we would take and which can assist the Portuguese authorities in progressing the matter." End of quote. And obviously the McCanns are thrilled with the remit. This remit means that the 40 or so police engaged on the review team can only investigate an abduction. Their job is to find who the abductor is, even if the case shelved by the Portuguese police mentioned a version of Madeleine dying in apartment 5A and the McCanns hiding the body. Scotland Yard's review went against the PJ decision. The decision by Hamish Campbell meant the parents cannot be investigated, neither their Tapa 7 friends. Hamish Campbell was answerable to Commander Simon Foy, and he was a very strange choice because of his blunders during his investigation of the murder of Jill Dando. Campbell was in charge of that investigation, responsible only to Brian Moore, the senior investigating officer. Moore had been criticized by 3 appeal court judges in the case of another man clearly fitted up for a shooting offense. In that case, judges suggested that on Moore's instructions, gun residue matching the crime weapon had been placed in the wrongfully convicted man's pocket. It was exactly the same forensic evidence that sent Barry Bulsara, better known as Barry George, to prison for 8 years for murdering Jill Dando. So they in fact planted evidence on the wrong person. Soon after Campbell took over the Dando investigation, he made public statements that her killer was probably a loner. Yet, all the evidence suggested that the killer of Dando was a professional. Later, shotgun residue was found in Bulsara's coat pocket, and the jury declared him guilty of murdering Dando. 3 appeal court judges later freed him. So, considering this, I have to ask, why was the senior detective who prosecuted a wrong man with planted evidence put in charge of Operation Grange? Okay, the same day David Cameron announces the setting up of the review. His spokesman tells the media, and I quote, "The purpose of the review is to help the McCann family." End of quote. From the beginning, as you can see, the narrative was to help the parents, which would mean the parents are not guilty. They didn't do it. They don't need to be investigated. And this even goes against any statistics of child disappearance, as I mentioned from COP as well. Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood, during his investigation, emphasizes what Cameron's spokesman also said. And I quote again, "Neither her parents nor any of the members of the group that were with her, the Tapa 7, are either persons of interest or suspects." And this is coming from the chief of the investigation. There was no opportunity or any pathway leading to the parents being investigated since the beginning. And for a police force to ignore not the statistics but the people that were with Madeleine on holiday, it's really not a professional thing to do, in my opinion, and it usually raises some eyebrows, honestly. It's not rocket science, and there's also no training needed to understand that anything has to be looked into, no matter how unlikely it may seem. But at least then there is some peace of mind that you looked into it, and nothing came of it, but at least you tried. And you know what? Quite honestly, I wouldn't want to be in those police officers' shoes. There are so many of them who believe the McCanns are involved in Madeleine's disappearance, but they are stopped from essentially doing their jobs. You know that Andy Redwood was Campbell's second in command, right? He was within 3 years of retirement, and his deputy was Detective Inspector Tim Dobson. They made a team of 38 officers based at Belgravia Police Station in London, and the weekly cost for Operation Grange per week was somewhere around £50,000 per week, which also included police officers' trips to Portugal. Over the years, in 2014, Andy Redwood is replaced by DCI Nicola Wall. Hamish Campbell left in 2013. Deputy Assistant Met Police Commissioner Martin Hewitt was at one point overseeing Operation Grange. It was at the time of Nicola Wall, I'm pretty sure you've heard this one before, that Dr. Mark Perlin, a leading DNA expert and head of cybernetics in the US, offered free of charge to retest the DNA and forensic evidence found in apartment 5A. There are different means of testing. Science and technology is much more advanced now than it was in 2007, and Dr. Perlin's true allele method could uncover the truth. But of course, Dr. Mark Perlin's offer was refused. I'm not surprised, honestly. If Operation Grange's purpose is to pursue only the abduction theory, and let's say for a second hide what really happened, then retesting the DNA would most likely prove the parents were involved. And this can't be allowed to happen because it might lead to opening a can of worms. There is actually there is a petition on change.org, and I'll leave the link in the description below, where I invite you to please sign the petition. This demands Scotland Yard to hand over crucial DNA evidence to leading expert Dr. Perlin. It would be really great if you could sign the petition. Also make sure you share wherever you can. Maybe we can collect enough signature, and maybe we can make a change. You never know. We are entitled to know the truth of what happened. So again, I'm leaving the link in the description below. Please make sure you check it out, you sign, and you share as much and everywhere you can. Okay. There was a point where Colin Sutton, a retired detective, was assumed to be asked to lead the investigation, according to an interview with him and Sonia Polton. However, he received a phone call from a very good friend of his warning him not to accept the role, as he will only be allowed to investigate an abduction. He won't be able to investigate the parents, and his friend gave him the heads up so he knows what he would get involved in if the offer came along.
I got a phone call from a friend of mine who was a very senior Metropolitan Police officer, and I was told, don't do it. You know, if the newspaper report was true and you are going to be asked to investigate this, don't do it. And the reason I was given was that I would not be happy mounting an investigation, leading an investigation where I was told where I could and where I couldn't go, what I could look at, what I couldn't look at. And my friend knew that I would find that frustrating, and I'd probably kick against that, and I'd want to do it properly. I'd want to do a proper reinvestigation, looking across the piece to all the possibilities. And it seems that he knew that I wouldn't be able to do that if I took it on.
How did you interpret that?
I certainly interpreted that at the time as being that there was no question of looking at any question of guilt on the part of Kate and Jerry McCann. Yeah, I can't tell you why abduction was the only thing that was pursued, but I can certainly say that from what I've seen, from what I know, that appears to be the case, because not only did I get the warning off, but I've subsequently looked at the terms of reference for Operation Grange, which talk about abduction. But perhaps even more tellingly, in the CEOPS report, which really was the basis for setting up Operation Grange, it goes through the chronology of what's gone on in terms of British support for the Portuguese and the British sort of law enforcement response. And we can see that when the first Gold Steering Group was formed, which was on the 8th of May, so it's 5 days after Madeleine went missing, they are already at that point using the word abduction, talking about supporting the Portuguese investigation into the abduction. So it seems to me that there was a mindset that was taken on at a very early stage in this investigation, and which has persisted all the way through up to the current time with Operation Grange.
She wasn't old enough to make a decision to set off and start her own life. However she left that apartment, she's been abducted.
Now what I take that to mean is, because we know that at the time we are told Madeleine McCann went missing from flat 5A, we know her parents and their friends weren't in that flat with them at the time. Therefore, they could not have taken her, or they're not suspects. That doesn't follow, does it? I mean, that's not logical. That's not a kind of forensic way of looking at it, because that's based on some pretty huge assumptions.
Over the years, we know there was a lot of criticism on Operation Grange. Labour Lord Toby Harris was on the Metropolitan Police Authority when Operation Grange was first announced, and he said, and I quote, "What we are looking at is a case where the Met has no direct responsibility. There is clearly an issue about the resources being used. It's not just a question of direct costs, it's a question of opportunity costs as well." Later, the Daily Telegraph ran a headline, and I quote again, "David Cameron is accused of meddling in the Madeleine McCann investigation." It also included further strong comments from Lord Harris, who said, and I quote again, "The Prime Minister has driven a coach and horses through operational independence and had forced the Metropolitan Police to work outside its jurisdiction." The Green Party member of the authority, Jenny Jones, also commented, and I quote, "As a member of the MPA, I have to look at how resources are responsibly used. There are many serious crimes in London, and it is the job of the Met Police to investigate crimes on a fair and impartial basis. Tying up vast amounts of police time and resources on one case does not instill confidence that each crime will be investigated on its own merits. For example, the Forensic Service Unit has been closed. Many will wonder what the Prime Minister's motives were and whether he understands how difficult policing is in this economic climate. I believe that the Prime Minister was wrong to allocate Met Police resources to the Madeleine Mccann investigation. He appears to have been swayed by the Sun newspaper, and it is wholly wrong to capitalize in this way and try to win popular support for what is fundamentally a Portuguese investigation." And she's right, isn't she? She was right. It was the Sun newspaper with Rebecca Brooks. Then on the other hand, it is a Portuguese investigation. The British police shouldn't even have been involved in it. And again I say it, if you would be the Portuguese police, the case would have been solved years ago, potentially even in 2007. Liberal Democrat Pierre Lord Bradshaw also added, and I quote again, "The decision is a PR exercise. Chief constables are desperately worried that their operational independence will be compromised." The reports indicated at the time that the Home Office granted another £2 million to Operation Grange for further investigative work until April 2016. On the 26th of April 2015, a number of newspapers reported that Operation Grange was to be scaled down from 29 full-time officers to just 4. There were some impressive statistics given by Operation Grange at the time, probably to justify the amount of money spent or requested. Okay, as it went, then 1,338 statements taken, 1,027 exhibits collected, 650 sex offenders considered, 8,685 potential sightings of Madeleine around the world considered, 560 lines of inquiry pursued, over 11,000 mobile phone records seized and examined, 31 rogatory requests sent to a number of countries. Several suspects, some of them named, were questioned and or interviewed under caution. And after all this was done, nothing was found. DCI Redwood made one of his many memorable and strange statements about his investigation, and I quote, "We are working backwards from the moment Madeleine went missing. To understand what happened to her is like peeling back the layers from an onion." End of quote here. Well, I think if you would truly peel back the layers from an onion, at the core of it, you would already find the people responsible. You don't even need to look beyond Rotley, Leicestershire. And then what you can do, you just dice the onion, if you get what I mean, and when the onion is fried, voila, the case is solved. Bad comparison, I know, but I was just carrying on the narrative of the onion. Let's see now what's left of Operation Grange. As of 2019, Detective Chief Inspector Mark Cranwell was put in part-time charge of Operation Grange, which has cost taxpayers £12 million to date. Well, officially £12 million, but I think he went way over £13 million. So far, he has not made a single arrest, yet was still granted another £300,000 by the Home Office in June 2019. The Met said, and I quote, "As of 30th of September 2019, there are 4 officers working full-time on Operation Grange, 1 detective sergeant and 3 detective constables. The senior investigating officer is Detective Chief Inspector Mark Cranwell, who does not work full-time on the investigation. DCI Cranwell reports to Commander Stuart Candy from the Met's Specialist Crime Command, who has chief officer responsibility for Operation Grange." So, There you have it. From a team of over 30 officers, they got down to 4 running Operation Grange. Funding is still coming in. For what? I have no idea. There's no new evidence. Always kept in the newspapers, a lead here and then a lead there, witness who saw this and witness who saw that, breakthrough in the case, Christian Bruckner a suspect, but then he's not. It's just ridiculous. Grasping at straws, trying to keep the story going. The McCanns never giving up hope that Madeleine is still alive. All a farce. It's all a farce in my opinion. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as it turns out, in the last couple of days, as we've seen in the media, on the telly, in the news, online newspapers, online articles, radio, wherever, Operation Grange yet again received another £350,000 in more funding for a sham investigation. So here we have 4 police officers investigating Operation Grange with no leads, with no suspects. They receive again £350,000 in a sham investigation. How ridiculous this is. How ridiculous it is. Oh my God, completely unbelievable. For how long are we going to keep doing this? I have no idea. The year passed and there's nothing new. We already know what happened with Madeleine, but I don't know when there will be someone who will actually say stop and put an end to it. I had my coffee, now let's get started. Don't forget to bring your coffee as well. So, in my previous video, we covered Operation Grange, but now I want to look at Metodo 3. Metodo 3 are the team of private investigators employed by the McCanns after their return from Portugal, where they were made suspects, as we know. It seems that the total amount spent on Metodo 3 is somewhere between £300,000 and £700,000, but we'll get back to this in a while in more detail. Metodo 3 are Spanish-based, family-run detective agency set up in 1985 by Maria Marco, also known as Marita or Marita Fernandez Lado. The director of this agency is Maria's son, who is Francisco Marco. When Metodo 3 was hired, Francisco insisted the agency had a 100% success rate and managed to reunite 23 missing children with their families. However, in an interview in 2003, he said the agency's main focus is companies, and I think most of their work involved investigating fraud, which would explain why their senior employees were lawyers. They were hired on a 6-month contract, and even though the McCanns only mentioned them as being hired officially in October 2007, I believe they were brought into the investigation much earlier, maybe after the McCanns were made suspects, quite possibly to muddy the waters over who was actually doing the investigation, you know, to get us confused. Yes, I know that the McCanns said Metodo 3 were brought in to help find Madeleine, because the McCanns were not happy with the PJ investigation and blah blah and blah blah. But you know what? I'm actually not buying it. I think that is utter and complete rubbish. It's my opinion. The McCanns knew very well where Madeleine was, but of course something more had to be done just to show how useless the PJ was in finding Madeleine, right? And in the end, as Jerry loves to say, confusion is good. I think their move was supposed to make us doubt the capability of the Portuguese police in investigating. The McCanns were always bringing forward that the avenues the PJ are taking in the investigation are not helping Madeleine, are not helping find Madeleine, and it's all a waste of time. Obviously, the PJ were sent in all the wrong directions, investigating potential leads which were nothing more than distraction tactics, in my opinion. I have to say, in my opinion. We have, as you know, we have the Tannerman, we have the timelines, we have the sightings all over the world. Now in this country, the next minute in another country across the world. Now this witness saw this van. Now they saw Robert Murat lurking around the Palmon 5A. Now there was a couple who abducted Madeleine. But no, it was a man. But hold on, no, it was a woman. But wait, there were more than one who participated in the abduction. The curtain whooshed, but then they didn't. The shutters were up, but then they were down. The door was locked, unlocked. The door was open, closed, at a 45-degree angle. They even took the time to measure the angle. How precise and mathematical even, you know. If you just listen to what I said, do you even realize how this all sounds? It just sounds stupid, really. It sounds stupid in my opinion. But hey, like Jerry says, confusion is good, right? So, since we'll try not to be confused, which in some instances proves quite difficult in this case, I want to point out Metodo 3 were not the first detective agency hired by the McCanns. Just as the rich and powerful Brian Kennedy snapped his fingers along with his money, the Control Risks Group was whooshed into Praia da Luz just 9 days after Madeleine's disappearance. And this is the funniest one out of all. Listen to this. According to Kate's book, they just turned up during a meeting the McCanns had with a paralegal and the barrister from Leicester. Kate also said the agents from the group were sent by an anonymous yet wealthy donor who employed them so the McCanns can use their services if they wish so. Kate also made sure to add they were giving their statements to the detectives from the Control Risks Group within hours of their arrival. May I also add from myself how efficient they were, right? Much more efficient than the Portuguese police. That's what she's trying to highlight probably. Okay, so a paralegal is a person trained in legal matters but not quite a lawyer yet, yeah? Then a barrister is a specialized lawyer to represent clients in court. Now this is it for the English definitions. We are not in a school hour. So, let's see. It's just been 9 days after Madeleine's disappearance, okay? The Control Risks Group just popped in on the McCanns meeting. Why would the McCanns have a paralegal and barrister meeting anyway? Just 9 days after Madeleine's disappearance. How would that even help with finding Madeleine? You tell me how. I don't really think that parents of missing children should need legal advice, not especially so soon after their child's disappearance. Is this what they were so busy with following the days of Madeleine's disappearance? I mean, like they said in an interview, they were not physically searching, but they were so extremely busy in supporting the police in their search, apart, you know, from actually searching themselves. Yeah, that's how busy they were. Let the underdogs search, in this case, the police and other people, and the king and queen just sit down on their thrones and type in on their keyboard how to deceive everyone. In my opinion, of course. And again, why would a business tycoon like Brian Kennedy ask help from Control Risks Group, which is, and I quote, a specialist global risk consultancy that helps organizations succeed in a volatile world. Through insight, intelligence, and technology, we help you seize opportunities while remaining secure, compliant, and resilient. When crises and complex issues arise, we help you recover. I mean, end of quote. I mean, you do whatever you want with the group's objectives, which I just talked about, but the McCanns were hardly an organization at the beginning. That is, at the beginning. They became a company with millions? Well, yeah, they did. Which I think was the whole point of it, right? This Control Risks Group has more than 600 employees. Many of those are former members of MI5, MI6, the SAS, which is Special Air Service, and the Special Boat Service. And I quote again, when crises arise, we help you recover. End of quote. Is that what they did with the Special Boat Service and the MI5? Maybe they helped clean up the scene and transport the body? Came up with a plan? I mean, anyway, I'm speculating here, so please don't take legal action against me. Okay, anyway, let's get back on track with this. This same company or group, or whatever you want to call it, was allegedly also on a retainer by the PR company Bell Pottinger, or Bell Pottinger, whatever his name is, or the name is, as part of a crisis management team on behalf of Mark Warner, which makes you wonder, why were Control Risks Group brought in so soon? Was it really to help find Madeleine, or more like to deal with damage limitation, you know? Control Risks Group was formed in 1975 as a professional advisor to the insurance industry. The private security company was one of 4 such companies used by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to protect its property and staff in Iraq. CRG is a subsidiary of Hogg Robinson, insurance broker. Okay, so do you want to see the link here with all of this? Get ready. It really all is so cleverly planned, it's amazingly disturbing and frustrating at the same time. Baroness Justice Mary Hogg is the conservative peer responsible for making Madeleine McCann a ward of court in May 2007. Her sister is Sarah Hogg, chairman of British private equity company 3i plc, which is a major investor in both Brian Kennedy's double glazing companies and the Control Risks Group. Why was Madeleine made a ward of court so soon after the disappearance? I have no idea whatsoever. It was in May. You know, she could have been found. And this really doesn't make any sense. No, it doesn't. I mean, how did they move so quickly, and why did they move so quickly? It makes me think perhaps there was no accident followed by a cover-up. Maybe it was something so meticulously planned way before Praia da Luz holiday. There are just too many people involved. In the days and weeks following Madeleine's disappearance, there was just too much happening at once, which does not seem normal. The press, the British consul, Clarence Mitchell, Gordon Brown, Brian Kennedy, Bell Pottinger, so many other things which just don't normally happen. Any parent with a missing child would still struggle at that point to come to terms that their child disappeared. Who would even be able to function in that situation? And so well, you know, like press releases, photo shoots, visits, trips, meetings, interviews, constant spotlight. I don't get it. Anyway, between the 5th and 12th of May 2007, 2 top people from Control Risks Group were dispatched to Praia da Luz, Kenneth Farrow and Michael Keenan. Farrow was the ex-head of the Economic Crime Unit in the City of London Police, and Keenan was an ex-superintendent from the Metropolitan Police with specialist fraud and investigative experience. How could they help find a missing child? I have no idea. Honestly. But Jane Tanner admits to speaking to them before she identified Robert Murat as the man with the child she claimed to have seen on 3rd of May. Okay guys, let's take a coffee break. Coffee break. You are allowed to drink as well, okay? Good. Coffee. Oh, the smell of coffee. Okay, my energy levels are up. Let's carry on. Antonio Martins, president of the Association of Portuguese Judges, told the 24 Horas newspaper, and I quote, "It is still up to the state to carry out criminal investigation. That kind of activity has no legal standing. Anything that results from private investigation has no substance." End of quote. The judge added that Mr. and Mrs. McCann from Rotley, Leicestershire, could be charged with obstruction of justice if prosecutors found evidence of a parallel investigation. At the time, the couple were official suspects in the disappearance of their daughter from a holiday apartment in Praia da Luz. A high-ranking officer in the Policia Judiciaria, PJ, which was investigating the disappearance of Madeleine shortly before her 4th birthday, said that the investigators could be detained if they were found operating in Portugal. And I quote again, "If they come here, they will be running a serious risk of being arrested," he said. End of quote. Okay, a last thing that I want to touch about the Control Risks Group is that allegedly there was a report from the same group where it states, after speaking with Jerry McCann and the Tapas Group, that the key that Jerry McCann said to have used to open the door had in fact been left in the kitchen's counter. Now, I did try my best to find this report, but I could not find any more info on it. So guys, please, if any of you are able to find more details about this report, I would be more than happy to have another look into it. And I also want to read it, but I honestly can't seem to be able to find it, if there is such a report. There is. So, in September 2007, Brian Kennedy commissioned a private detectives firm based in Barcelona, Metodo 3, to conduct a parallel investigation to the one by the Portuguese police. On 15th of September 2007, John McCann issued a statement from the board of Madeleine's fund, which said, and I quote, "On behalf of the extended McCann family and the Madeleine Fund, I would like to say how grateful we are for people's generosity and support. The main objective of the Madeleine Fund is to leave no stone unturned in the search for Madeleine. To that end, I would like to announce that the fund will finance a broad range of initiatives in advertising to remind everyone that Madeleine is still missing. These adverts will focus on Spain, Portugal and other parts of Europe and will consist of billboards and other media. This financing of advertisements will complement previous efforts by the fund and many motivated individuals, family, friends and people touched by our cause. I hope that the general public will continue to support us in this. It is so important that we remember, don't you forget about me, our lovely wee Madeleine." End of quote. By this point, it's safe to say, and I believe, Metodo 3 had already been hired to investigate. What I find extraordinary is John McCann does not mention that at all. Anything whatsoever about the agency being hired in this statement. It seems he's making a public statement to announce new advertising initiatives, but the board of directors are not making public. They've just committed around £600,000 of Madeleine's fund, which they have been put in place to administer Metodo 3. Yes, I know, as a private company they had the right to keep that information hidden from the general public. But this is coming from the board's desire to keep public their commitment to find Madeleine, especially as the official Find Madeleine site states, and I quote, "An experienced fund administrator has been appointed to ensure the highest standards of transparency and accountability." This is end of quote. In my opinion, this secrecy really gives a hint of deception. Even John McCann's statement. It does. This is how I feel. I feel like he says it the way he says it, so that people are sympathetic and that they carry on giving more and more money. And on the other hand, they really do have to sort of make this kind of public statements to keep people updated, and not directly but indirectly to say, we need more money because this is what we are doing. So the more you give us, the more we can do. Something like that anyway. There is a significant amount being paid by Madeleine's fund to cover the fees of Metodo 3. And I talked about this a bit in another video, but let's recap. Following a great deal of confusion caused by Madeleine's fund's own brand of secrecy, the answer appears to be around £8,000 a monthly fee for Metodo 3 paid by wealthy supporter, £50,000 monthly flat fee operational costs paid by Madeleine's fund, any excess over £50,000 per month paid by wealthy backers. Among others, the wealthy backers were reported to include double glazing tycoon Brian Kennedy and Virgin boss Sir Richard Branson. The thing is though, this huge amount of money at one point was denied by Metodo 3. Metodo 3 even threatened to sue the British media after publishing defamatory information about the fees, saying they only charged around £100,000, not £700,000 as mentioned in the media. I mean, I don't know who's right now. There's again another thing which we are getting confused about, or perhaps might this have something to do with money laundering, fraud? Who knows? Brian Kennedy, as mentioned in an article, used to spend half a year holidays in Spain. He has a villa on the outskirts of Barcelona. He chose Metodo 3, who are based in Barcelona, and some say that Kennedy knew Metodo 3 before Maddie's disappearance. Metodo 3's main investigators, Francisco Marco, Antonio Jimenez Rasso, Antonio Tamarit and Julian Peribanes, were all based in Barcelona. On 13th of November 2007, Marco and Jimenez Rasso traveled from Barcelona to meet with Brian Kennedy at the PJ's Portimao headquarters. They gave the PJ 3 credible sightings, which of course turned out to be false leads, like everything else which these people hand over to the PJ, or handed over. And now this makes me wonder, seriously, were Metodo 3 tasked to fabricate leads or information? I mean, it's not like they ever found anything, really. Anyway, on 10th of December 2007, Marco and Jimenez Rasso again traveled from Barcelona, this time to meet at the Arad Dam, Portugal, with Marcos Aragao Correa, the lawyer from Madeira who was then employed by the McCann team to prosecute Gonzalo Amaral. There, they plotted 2 strange searches of the Arad Dam in January and March 2008. I think that you guys are familiar with this. They were searching in a reservoir, which were conducted, the searches were conducted by Correa, the same lawyer. Detectives from Metodo 3 in Barcelona again traveled to the Arad Dam to collect the exhibits of bones and clothes dragged by divers from the lake. Turns out the bones they found were animal bones, no connection whatsoever to Madeleine. Yet another waste of money and also resources. On 17th of February 2008, McCann team investigator Jimenez Rasso was arrested and charged with supplying information to a gang which had stolen 25 kilos of cocaine from a boat in Barcelona harbor in 2004. At that time, in 2004, Jimenez Rasso was a detective inspector for the Regional Drugs and Trafficking Squad, based in Barcelona. Julian Peribanes, one of Metodo 3 top private investigators, worked closely with Brian Kennedy's main UK-based investigator, Nottingham-based Gary Hagland, best known as an expert in financial compliance and money laundering. Peribanes visited England at least once, taking part in interview with the Jansen Wilshire sisters, who produced another dramatic story of a suspicious man for the British mainstream press at the end of 2007. Along with his boss, Francisco Marco, and other Metodo 3 staff, got in big trouble in early 2013. He and a number of other Metodo 3 staff were revealed to have been behind the illegal recording of conversations between high-level Spanish politicians in a Barcelona restaurant. In particular, they recorded the president of the Catalan PP party, Alicia Sanchez Camacho, interviewing Jordi Pujol, Ferrusola's ex-lover. Peribanes was discovered to have been involved and arrested. He admitted his guilt and confessed everything to the police. In 2014, it was announced that he became a poacher turned gamekeeper by publishing, together with the former head of Metodo 3 in Madrid, Antonio Tamarit, a book blowing the lead on corruption in Portugal, but also more specifically the illegal activities carried out by Metodo 3. The book, La Cortina de Humo, The Smokescreen by Peribanes and Tamarit, was banned after the Metodo 3 boss, Francisco Marco, applied for an injunction banning the sale of the book and banning both authors from ever speaking about the contents of it. In his book, Antonio Tamarit says, and I quote, Marita Fernandez and Jose Luis Marco Lavinia traveled to Manchester. These were Francisco Marco's mother, who had not carried out any investigative work for many years, and her nephew, the company's accountant. This was all symptomatic of the plans they were setting up at poor Madeleine's expense. The aunt and nephew team returned from Manchester in heroic style. They made a big point of emphasizing that Where this operation was concerned, they were not motivated by money. However, in reality, they ended up making a fortune by means of deception and dishonest trickery. I was sent to Portugal on 2 occasions, just to make up the numbers, because in theory a whole army of Metodo 3 detectives were supposed to be working in Portugal. The reality of the situation was very different. Nobody from Metodo 3 was actually working there except Julian Peribanes, who was burning the midnight oil in an attempt to solve the case, and Elisenda Vilenia for several months. After I had left Metodo 3, I began to realize to what extent the company was swindling the fund, which had been set up and which was supported by hundreds of unsuspecting people whose sole objective was to find Madeleine. Nothing special, just inflated expenses, invented items and false invoices. Who were the beneficiaries of this dishonesty? Needless to say, the usual suspects: Francisco Marco, Marita Fernandez and his cousin Jose Luis Marco Lavinia. End of quote. Julian Peribanes, in the same book, says that the search for Madeleine was agreed to take place only in Portugal and Morocco, contrary to what we've read, that it took place in more countries. Those were fabrications, according to Julian. Francisco Marco, whenever asked how many men were looking for Madeleine McCann, he would say at least 20, but that was another lie. So he would be able to inflate Metodo 3's invoices, and he also gave Marco the opportunity to brag about this to the press. Peribanes also says in the book, and I quote, "Headlines in the media stated that a mechanism has been set up whereby operators would answer calls in Spanish, English, French, Italian, Arabic and Portuguese. However, this consisted in reality of a switchboard which redirected calls to our office, where Metodo 3's employees, including myself, answered them. Before going on to describe the nature of the calls we received, I should mention that our understanding of English, French, Italian, Arabic and Portuguese certainly left room for improvement. In any event, the linguistic element was of no consequence given that no relevant information was lost. Fortune tellers, Spanish playing card and tarot readers, necromancers, palmists, individuals who had had dreams but did not know what they were about, followed by others who offered interpretations of those dreams. In short, pure esotericism and complete time wasting, all of which was the result of Francisco Marco's bright and unique ideas about how to find little Madeleine." End of quote. In August of 2009, the McCann team held a press conference to mention a possible sighting of Madeleine. Information given by an anonymous British banker or businessman who had been drinking all evening in the bars around Barcelona docks on Sunday, 6th of May 2007. He claimed that a Victoria Beckham lookalike around 20 years old with an Australian accent approached him on the dockside at 2 a.m. to ask, and I quote, "Have you got my new daughter?" End of quote. He waited 2 years before releasing this worthless piece of information. 2 years. The McCann team suggested that Madeleine was abducted on a yacht which had sailed from Praia da Luz to Barcelona. In her book, Kate McCann wrote about the legal help the family had been receiving, and I quote, "Adam Tudor and his colleague Isabel Hudson continue to do a vast amount of work for us without payment." And end of quote. Isabel Hudson was later the Carter Ruck solicitor who conducted the legal proceedings from 2009 to 2013 against Tony Bennett. In 2008, she referred to how much she enjoyed regular weekends flying to Barcelona and walking in the Catalonian hills around Barcelona. In 2012, she married Mr. Javier Martorell from Barcelona, and she is now known as Isabel Martorell. It was in the Martorell No. 1 court in Barcelona that McCann investigator Jimenez Raso was tried over his alleged involvement with a 27-strong, exceptionally violent criminal gang that had stolen the cocaine from a boat in Barcelona harbor, and he was found not guilty. It seems that we do have quite some focus and a bit of connections to Barcelona. In July 2008, it was reported that Metodo 3 were the subject of a criminal process by the PJ in Faro. for suspected extortion and attempted murder. The case involved a former inmate who was paid by the detective agency Metodo 3 to supply information that he allegedly obtained in prison from Joao Cipriano, the uncle of 8-year-old Joanna, who disappeared from the Algarve in 2004. Joao Cipriano allegedly told the former inmate that he owned recent photographs of Joanna and that he also had information that was related to Madeleine Mccann. After the money was received, the information was not given, and the individual was tortured by the Metodo 3 detectives, filing a complaint with the PJ in Faro for attempted murder. Coordinating the case of Joanna Cipriano was Gonzalo Amaral and his team. During the investigation, the maternal uncle of Joanna, Joao Cipriano, and her mother, Leonor Cipriano, both confessed to the murder of 8-year-old Joanna. It was revealed that Leonor and her brother Joao had an incestuous relationship, which Joanna unfortunately happened to discover by chance. Joao and Leonor both confessed in October 2004 and each received a 16-year prison term. The confession was also backed forensically with evidence of Joanna's blood discovered in the freezer at their home. The case of Joanna Cipriano holds certain relevance in relation to that of Madeleine Mccann, as Kate and Jerry's private investigators, Metodo 3, were actively seeking to discredit Gonzalo Amaral. Leonor Cipriano, with the aid of lawyer Marcos Aragao Correa, tried to bring a case against 5 Portuguese officers, claiming that torture and abuse from the accused officers brought about a forced confession. The trial of the PJ inspectors also revealed many attempts by Leonor Cipriano's lawyer to discredit Gonzalo Amaral both professionally and personally. Correa is the same lawyer who previously hit the headlines when he organized an underwater search for Madeleine's body at the Arad Dam in Portugal, which we just talked about a bit earlier in the video. He admitted that Metodo 3 ordered him to do an investigation into the accusation of torture, but he denied pay to frame Gonzalo Amaral. The 5 officers accused were eventually acquitted of the torture charges. However, Antonio Nunes Cardoso, one of the 5 officers acquitted of torture charges, was found guilty of having falsified documents and received a 2.5-year suspended sentence. Amaral, who was not on duty at that time, was also convicted of falsifying documentation in the case, which quite honestly wasn't fair, but that's how the system works. He received an 18-month suspended sentence. That being said, Amaral merely stated what his officers had reported to him at that time. I'm mentioning this case actually because there are a lot of people out there who say that this is the reason Amaral was removed from Madeleine's investigation, because of his involvement in Joanna's case and allegations of torture and falsifying, which is simply not true. He wasn't on duty when the other police officer falsified documents. He didn't know about it. He was only writing what the other inspector told him, and he wasn't even in the building when Leonor claimed she was being tortured. He received a suspended sentence because he was responsible for that investigation and the police officers involved. Being responsible for the investigation, any wrongdoings found would of course affect him as well. It's the nature of the job really, and what comes with this kind of responsibility. You know, to put it in general terms, it's like when you have a job at a supermarket, yeah, and you work at the tills, at the checkout, and your colleague steals money from your checkout whilst covering your break, right? Because it's your till and your shift, you can be held responsible even though you didn't steal those money because you were on your break. Anyway, going back to Amaral. Following the delivery of the verdict, Leonor Cipriano's lawyer, Correa, said to Metodo 3, and I quote, "Target was hit, Gonzalo Amaral was convicted." End of quote. This speaks for itself, in my opinion. Leonor Cipriano was given 7 extra months on her sentence for lying about being tortured. So we found out that she was actually lying, so that makes it not true what she said about Gonzalo Amaral. So what came of it? Nothing was true. It was only made to discredit Gonzalo Amaral. All made up. It was brought up in Madeleine McCann's investigation only to discredit Amaral's work on this case. The investigators from Metodo 3 were also suspected of persecuting Robert Murat for several months, trying to find elements to incriminate him. Tracking devices were also detected on Murat's car. Julian Peribanes was informed by Francisco Marco that the Madeleine Fund contract terminated. Julian, at this point, he knew of the fraud the Metodo 3 were doing in terms of the Madeleine Fund money, so he decided to contact Brian Kennedy. After a few emails sent mentioning him and Antonio Tamari discovered Metodo 3 had conned the Madeleine Fund by producing false invoices, and they wanted to meet with Kennedy in order to check the information with him. Kennedy, at this point, is asking Julian to contact his lawyer, Edward Smithhurst, who was also on the board of directors of the fund, which he did, of course. So he sent him a similar email to which Smithhurst replies, and I quote, "Dear Julian, I have just finished participating in a telephone conference with our advisors. As you are probably aware, the Metropolitan Police is currently responsible for the investigation. Therefore, the Trust, the Madeleine Fund, has decided neither to meet with nor to discuss the investigation with any private investigators whilst the Metropolitan Police are carrying out their investigation. We will therefore not be able to meet with you. However, if you have any information which may assist the Trust, the Madeleine Fund, or the investigation, please feel free to send it to us by email and we will welcome this." End of quote. Julian, at this point, he got so frustrated because he was trying to expose the scam, but they were not listening to him. He was angry at how cold and ignorant of the fraud Smithhurst was, especially because they were charged for work which was not carried out. They had their hopes raised only to come to nothing. Feeling let down, Julian wanted to find out exactly what the Madeleine Fund's position was, and so he sent them the following email, and I quote, "I understand that your position is as follows, that we wish to assist the Madeleine Fund to uncover a fraud which was perpetrated against the above fund by a firm of private detectives, Metodo 3, with which the fund had entered into a contract, and that you do not wish to hold a meeting with us, and that you will not cooperate with us in order to expose the above agency, which has stolen money destined for locating Madeleine Mccann, which people around the world had donated out of the goodness of their hearts for the purpose of finding a missing girl, and which ended up lining the pockets of Metodo 3 as a result of false invoicing. Please, would you simply let me know whether I have got this right, as I am finding it difficult to understand your position, and solely for the sake of clarity, so that I can be sure that we cannot rely upon cooperation from the Madeleine Fund in relation to this matter, and to enable us to pursue this issue in a different direction. With best wishes, Julian." And this is end of quote. So, in case you got lost, this is the email Julian sent to Madeleine's Fund, right? To let them know what's happening with the scam, with the fraud thing. And, needless to say, Madeleine's Fund never replied to his email. So, it seems that Madeleine's Fund was being silent. Jerry McCann never replied to Julian's email either, the content of which was similar to the previously sent emails to Brian Kennedy and the lawyer Edward Smithhurst. So even Jerry McCann received an email and he never got back to Julian. It seems to me that these people were not looking to take any legal action against Metodo 3, even if they knew about the fraud, if there was really a fraud, which makes me wonder why. I mean, it's not like we are talking about 100 pounds of scam, but this is about almost 1 million pounds. Honestly, it makes me think that Metodo 3 either knew or found out something which could potentially incriminate the McCanns, and that's why the agency was never touched legally. Probably the McCanns had too much to lose. We do know by now how they liked throwing those fund money away on suing everyone. So if they didn't take legal action against Metodo 3, they didn't do it for a reason. They probably knew too much. This is my opinion. Anyway, Metodo 3 finally went out of business in 2014 after its boss, Francisco Marco, was found to have ordered his staff to illegally record private conversations between top Catalonian politicians at La Petit Paris, a restaurant in Barcelona. But then, to keep it going, in 2008, the McCanns employed Oakley International, an investigation firm in the United States described by investigative journalist Robin Swan as one of the big boys in investigations, run by Kevin Halligan. I am adding also a quote here. They were promised all sorts of things, that the people working for Oakley were former FBI, CIA and MI6, that they had the latest in investigative tools, techniques, technology available to them. They could do all sorts of things that Metodo 3, their previous investigators, could not do, Robin Swan said in the documentary. End of quote. Okay, long story short, because otherwise this will be too long of a video, it seems the McCanns were scammed once again by Oakley International after the other scam by Metodo 3. And Brian Kennedy was involved in both, having partially funded both agencies. So, I don't know. As it turns out, the McCanns get scammed not once, but twice. And each time, huge amounts of money are involved. I mean, tell me, what are the odds that someone can be scammed twice over the same thing, in this case, the investigation? Where was the due diligence? I mean, I know, yeah, you get scammed once, okay, fine, I can understand. But to be scammed twice? For the same thing? I mean, normal people, even when you get scammed of £20 for something which you didn't realize you did wrong, and you got scammed, the next time you pay more attention to make sure you're not gonna get scammed again. And that is for £10, £20, £5, whatever, £1, doesn't matter, because money is still money. But we are talking about almost £1 million. Seriously, this is very, very, very strange indeed. It seems like they were allowing themselves to be scammed. I don't know, does it have anything to do with fraud? Does it have anything to do with money laundering? I don't know, but it smells really fishy here. And you know, as I like saying, when it smells fishy, it really is fishy. I am really inclined to believe that this all had a purpose in the fraud game the McCanns have going, in my opinion. I think that, yes, I think that there is some sort of fraud here from the McCanns and the board of directors, whatever, everybody involved in this. But how do you think that they are doing it? Anyway, how do you think they are doing it? Please do let me know in the comments below. Let's begin. Shortly after the McCanns let go of Metodo 3, which allegedly scammed them, they are employing the services of Oakley International, a US registered company controlled and headed by Kevin Halligan. Oakley International was awarded £500,000 for a 6-month contract, and the company was overseen, or supervised if you like, by the same Brian Kennedy, just like Metodo 3 was. Why I'm saying awarded is because Oakley International won the contract after it was introduced by another company, Red Defence International, based in London, UK. This company was Kevin Halligan's company. Red Defence International was set up as an international security and political risk company, advising clients on risks involved in doing business in unstable countries. Halligan was a persuasive advocate of IT security. In 2006, his company, Red Defence International, was hired by Trafigura, the Dutch commodities trading company. Executives were imprisoned in the Ivory Coast after toxic waste was dumped in landfills near its biggest city, Abidjan. Trafigura was blamed and hired Red Defence International at vast expense to help with the negotiations to release its executives. The case ended when Trafigura paid $197 million to the government of the Ivory Coast to secure the release of the prisoners. Okay. Now let's get back to the McCanns. So when Harry Exton, a former undercover police officer who worked on MI5 operations, and Kevin Halligan, a smooth-talking Irishman who claimed to have worked for covert British government intelligence agency GCHQ, walked through the door, their timing was just perfect. Their sales speech was classic James Bond style. everything had to be top secret and on a need-to-know basis. The operation would involve 24-hour alert systems, undercover units, satellite imagery, and round-the-clock surveillance teams that would fly in at a short notice. This sounded very exciting, but it was also a big lie. But Brian Kennedy was impressed, and Exton and Halligan were hired for a fee of £100,000 per month plus expenses. The contract was with Halligan's UK security company, Red Defence International Limited. Only a tiny group of employees did the investigative work of dealing with thousands of emails and phone calls. Resources were channeled into undercover operations in pedophile rings and among gypsies throughout Europe, encouraged by Kennedy. A 5-man surveillance team was dispatched in Portugal, overseen by the experienced Exton, for 6 weeks. Born in Belgium in 1951, Exton had been a highly effective undercover officer for the Manchester police. He successfully infiltrated gangs of football hooligans in the 80s. In 1991, he was seconded to work on MI5 undercover operations against drug dealers, gangsters, and terrorists, and was later awarded the Queen's Police Medal for outstanding bravery. Exton was a dedicated officer, but in November 2002 the stress appeared to have overcome his judgment when he was arrested for shoplifting. While working on an MI5 surveillance, Exton was caught leaving a tax-free shopping area at Manchester Airport with a bottle of perfume he didn't pay for. The police were called and he was given the option of the offence being dealt with under caution or to face prosecution. He chose a police caution and so in effect admitted his guilt. Exton was sacked but was furious about the way he had been treated and threatened to sue MI5. So, he threw away his entire career for a bottle of perfume. Okay. This is another one, I hear. I don't think I actually came across anyone working for the McCanns to be an honest individual. They surround themselves and they are surrounded only by crooked people. But I guess this is what you need if you are one of them, in my opinion. But there's so much more to be said, especially about Kevin Halligan. Oakley International was registered as the manufacturer of search and navigation equipment. The company was registered in Washington, D.C., and the address given for the company was 2250 M Street, NW, Washington. This address was also the office of Patton Boggs, one of the largest and most powerful lawyer firms in America. Kevin Halligan donated $1,000 towards the primary election campaign put together by Washington, D.C. Congressman John R. Unger II in July 2008, according to U.S. Commission files. This puts him on the radar and Patton Boggs in the frame. John R. Unger II is a Democrat representing the 16th District in the West Virginia Senate. The senator acted as Homeland Security and Economic Development Advisor for EG&G, Egerton, Germershausen and Grier Incorporated United Research Services, a U.S. defense contractor. And according to Wikipedia, and I quote, EG&G, formerly known as Egerton, Germershausen and Grier, was a United States national defense contractor and provider of management and technical services. The company was involved in contracting services to the United States government during World War II and conducted weapons research and development during the Cold War era, from 1948 onwards. Its close involvement with some of the government's most sensitive technology has led to its being cited in conspiracy theories related to the Department of Defense black projects. End of quote. From 1999 until 2001, EG&G was wholly owned by the Carlyle Group. But wait for it, okay? The Carlyle Group is also the biggest investor in Kinetic plc, which is a privatized British defense and security company chaired between 2002 to 2005 by Baroness Neville Jones, a close friend of Baroness Sarah Hogg, former advisor to John Major. Hogg's private equity company 3i plc are major investors in Brian Kennedy and Control Risk Group, who provided risk services to the UK government in the aftermath of the war in Iraq. Sarah Hogg's sister, Justice Mary Hogg, is the legal guardian of Madeleine McCann, as a result of being made a ward of court in 2007. UK Private Equity and Private Intelligence and Defense Network advised and supported the McCanns from the beginning. Kinetic plc, which is chaired by Baroness Neville Jones, was sixth in a list of companies who received most of the annual expenditure on research and development tasks for the UK government's defense program from 2001 to 2008. Baroness Neville Jones, oh my god, this scared me again. Oh, I'm gonna switch it off. I'm always so jumpy, I don't know why. Okay, let's get back to it. Baroness Neville Jones was an advisor to Washington, D.C.'s Private Defense and Intelligence Forum, the intelligence summit organized by ex-Nazi prosecutor John Loftus and sponsored by Michael Cherney, who Interpol were looking to speak to on a number of alleged money laundering offenses. Richard Parton, who partnered Halligan on Madeleine's investigation, and Michael Shrimpton QC were also regular advisors at the annual intelligence summit. Greg Dyke was the one who accused Baroness Neville Jones and Baroness Sarah Hogg as being behind his sacking from the BBC as a result of his handling of David Kelly WMD affair. Here's how the David Kelly affair went. In 2002, Tony Blair's government was looking for valid reasons to join the US in invading Saddam Hussein's Iraq. An intelligence report published that September, with Number 10's full approval, stated that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction which posed a clear and present danger to the West. The report headlined the claim that Iraq could deploy and activate chemical weapons within 45 minutes of an order being given. So, Britain goes to war in March 2003 with the assumption the dossier was the truth, and Britain wins. But after the war, no one ever found any weapons of mass destruction. The war and its horrible consequences were based in part by the nation being deceived into thinking the invasion was justified by a government whose prime minister just wanted by any means to join the Americans into going to war. David Kelly, one of the world's top weapons inspectors and an employee of Britain's Ministry of Defense, gave a background briefing about the missing weapons of mass destruction, or WMD, to Andrew Gilligan, a BBC defense reporter working for BBC Radio 4. However, the version of the Kelly briefing transmitted by Andrew Gilligan on the BBC's Today programme claimed that his anonymous contact had told him that the published intelligence dossier had been sexed up before its publication, especially that 45-minute claim, a claim that made headlines in the British press when it was published, and a claim taken very seriously by the British public. The clear implication of Gilligan's BBC report was that the government had a hand in an attempt to deceive the public, and that Britain's intelligence services were unhappy with his Whitehall interference. A few days later, in a story in the Mail on Sunday, Gilligan went on to claim that his source named Alastair Campbell, Tony Blair's communications director, as being behind the inflation of the language in the dossier, an act which amounted to bending the truth to suit a political aim. In other words, the Prime Minister himself had been responsible, through his communications chief, of lying to Britain in order to join the Americans in invading Iraq. Gilligan's reports and the BBC immediately implicated the government, the intelligence services, and Campbell himself. David Kelly was probably the most distinguished arms inspector in the Western world. He was the one who established the Soviets had been planning to bombard the West with smallpox, anthrax, and plague in the event of a nuclear exchange. It was also he who, after the first war with Iraq, found the first real evidence of Baghdad's intention to produce nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare weapons of mass destruction. So, the dossier claiming Iraq had retained weapons of mass destruction was published in September 2002. The intelligence file had been collated by the GIC, the Cabinet Office Joint Intelligence Committee, under its chairman, Sir John Scarlett. He took responsibility for the document. Most of its assumptions were based on intelligence submitted by Britain's MI6 and some from the American CIA. Following David Kelly's suicide in 2003, Tony Blair, the then British Prime Minister, set up a government inquiry under Lord Hutton, a former Lord Chief Justice of Northern Ireland. The inquiry concluded that Kelly had committed suicide by cutting his left wrist and that his death was hastened by his taking coproxamol tablets. In my opinion, it's really strange the way that Kelly would have committed this suicide. So by what I was reading was that he took the coproxamol tablets from home and he went to the beach and he lay down on that beach and he took his wristwatch off his wrist to make space for the wrist to be, you know, without any obstructions. And he took those tablets, the coproxamol, and then he cut his wrist with a knife, as far as I understand from reading. So what is strange to me is that if someone wants to kill themselves, and the way I see, right, he took the tablets, yeah, so he wanted to make sure that he dies, right? After taking the tablets, he takes off his watch, he cuts his wrist, but then why is he cutting only one hand? I don't know, it doesn't make sense. Usually people, when they try to commit suicide and they cut their wrists, they cut both their wrists because they want to ensure that there is enough blood so they die, isn't it? Plus, on the other hand, he also took the tablets, so that thing doesn't make sense. Not the fact that he took the tablets, but the fact that he only cut his left wrist. It doesn't make sense at all. Anyway, moving on. Greg Dyke, the Director General, resigned 2 days after the publication of the report, following a meeting of BBC governors where it was reported he only retained the support of 1/3 of the board. However, after announcing his resignation, Dyke stated, and I quote, "I do not necessarily accept the findings of Lord Hutton." End of quote. Andrew Gilligan resigned because of his part in the affair on 30th of January. However, in his resignation statement, he questioned the value of Hutton's report. And I quote again, "This report casts a chill over all journalism, not just the BBC's. It seeks to hold reporters, with all the difficulties they face, to a standard that it does not appear to demand of, for instance, government dossiers." End of quote. Blair, who had been repeatedly under fire for the sexing up allegations, told the House of Commons in the debate following the release of the report that he had been completely exonerated. Right, let's get back to Halligan. The Homeland Security expert that Halligan backed, Senator John R. Unger II, earned his first degree and his master's at the University of Oxford. Control Risks Group, the private security company hired by Brian Kennedy, was one of the 4 companies used by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to protect its property and staff in Iraq. The address and employer's name given by Halligan when he donated to the US Congressman Unger II was the same address as Patton Boggs. Oakley International was also registered to the same address. TfL Defense was also registered to the same address. TfL Defense were military construction contractors who took over $170,000 in government defense contracts between 2000 and 2008. On the same donation record for the congressman, Halligan described his job as attorney or lawyer. Patton Boggs were also specialized lobby shop, and it represented many companies seeking and eventually winning contracts for infrastructure reconstruction in the wake of hostilities and regime change in countries like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Angola, and Pakistan. Oh my god. Oh my god, I found another twisted one. Oh my god. Okay. Colonel John Garrett, a defense lobbyist for Patton Boggs and frequent commentator for Fox News, Robert Murdoch's US news channel, was Halligan's best man at his wedding to Maria Dibzak, a trade lawyer for the US Commerce Department. That wedding, which was actually a fake wedding. And Halligan convinced his future wife of going ahead with the fake wedding by saying that he's actually a spy, and the people who he invited, they are infiltrating and whatever. Yeah, a sort of a cover-up for his fake marriage. But I think that he did have a different reason for it anyway. You'll find out later. Garrett had been introduced to Halligan at the Special Forces Club in Knightsbridge, central London. And according to the Times, Halligan's name was put forward by Major Donald Palmer, then chairman of entry into the Special Forces Club, and Major General John Holmes, a former commander of the SAS, Special Air Services, and former director of Special Forces. Another senior US defense figure and regular Fox News commentator, Andre Hollis, was chief executive at Oakley International. Hollis became friend with Halligan in Washington, where Hollis worked as a vice president of Van Scoyoc Associates, a powerful lobbying firm that performed services on behalf of the British Embassy's defense procurement program. As a consequence of this work, Van Scoyoc was registered as a foreign agent of the United Kingdom. Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Hollis was the senior department official responsible for efforts to train and equip security forces in Colombia and Afghanistan. So, oh my god. Okay, I am just realizing now how twisted everything seems to be. And it seems that like all of it revolves around weapons, defense, war, and stuff like that. Oh, okay. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. So, a lot of people are saying that Halligan was a high-class scammer, right? It's everywhere in the media that he was a scammer. Or he faked high-class to scam high-class people, right? He siphoned money wherever he could from, and he became a persona that he created as a wealthy, well-connected individual at the top levels. He lived lavishly on borrowed money and lies. He was more or less a jack of all trades and master of none, right? Okay, although I find it very, very hard to believe Halligan was so intelligent that he managed to trick all these people, congressmen, secretary of defense, lawyers, officials, public figures. No, it's almost impossible. To me, it looks like, you know, watching a movie where you have this well-written character who is covered from all points of view to seem exactly the character that he is meant to be. Nothing more, nothing less. During 2008, Hollis and Van Scoyoc provided lobbying services to the Forensic Science Services based in Birmingham, FSS, and very much at the center of Madeleine Mccann investigation. This is where I was getting to. The current head of the FSS at that time was Simon Bennett, previously MD at Kinetic plc, the former government defense company run by Baroness Neville Jones. Before that, Bennett was in defense and aerospace. Britain's previous major investor in forensic services was 3i plc, the private equity company behind Brian Kennedy and Control Risks Group. Hollis and Van Scoyoc also lobbied the Senate in Washington on behalf of another 3i investment, the Ricardo Group plc. This Ricardo Group plc covers a range of market sectors, including passenger car, commercial vehicles, rail, defense, motorsport, motorcycle, off-highway, marine, clean energy and power generation, and government. Its client list includes transportation, original equipment manufacturers, supply chain organizations, energy companies, financial institutions, and government agencies, as well as the Shoreham UK headquarters. There are technical centers in Royal Leamington Spa, Cambridge, Chicago, Detroit, Aachen, Schwabes Gmund, Prague, and regional offices in Shanghai, Yokohama, Seoul, New Delhi, and Moscow. Everywhere. And that was taken from Wikipedia, what I just mentioned. So, Hollis and Oakley International were in charge of Madeleine McCann's investigation, right? At the same time that they were lobbying for the FSS and selling it off to the Yanks, a common term referred to for Americans. I couldn't find out exactly to who they were actually lobbying to sell the FSS to. So, how impartial do you think that they were to this investigation if they were so closely connected with the FSS, if they were dealing in a sale with the FSS? This is really problematic because the way I see it is just like with the police. So you have, let's say, a murder, right? The police officer at the scene finds out that the suspect is his cousin. Only by being related to the suspect, the police officer cannot carry on investigating because of his close connection to the case. He can't be impartial to the case. That's how I see it with Hollis, Oakley International and the FSS. And I think that if those DNA results were inconclusive as they say, this was done on purpose in my opinion. And here is another connection with the FSS. And I'll let you judge this by yourself. The non-executive chairman of Control Risks Group, the company recruited by the McCann sponsor Brian Kennedy in May 2007, was Major Stephen Rose. A veteran of Northern Ireland and the Gulf states, Major Rose was elected as president of the same Special Forces Club. At the same time, Halligan's friend, Major Donald Palmer, replaced Colonel Edward Toms as chairman. Because it was Rose's former forces friend Palmer who put Halligan's name forward in the first place, it's very likely, in my opinion, that Halligan, already known amongst the ex-forces and intelligence circle, was pushed too quick to the top. Maybe with the sole purpose of providing services to the McCanns and then secretly prepared to be a scapegoat. Which would make much more sense than highly intelligent people to be scammed like that. Seriously. It's also important to remember that it was Brian Kennedy who bought Oakley International in the game, just like he bought Metodo 3 in the game. It was also Brian Kennedy who ignored the ex-detectives from Metodo 3 when they accused the boss of scamming the Madeleine Fund. If indeed the McCanns are running a fraud together with Brian Kennedy and others, or money laundering, then, in my opinion, those money out of Madeleine's fund had to be spent somewhere to go through various companies. They had to sort of lose the trail. That's why what I'm seeing here is tons and tons of companies and subsidiaries being not involved but being connected somewhat to each other, and it's like, and it goes not only in the UK, it goes to America, and it goes to various different other countries. And no, there is no such thing as a child disappearance case to lead where he actually leads. There isn't, honestly. And then also we have Metodo 3. They were given 6 months contract, right? Then Oakley International, they were given 6 months contract as well. Operation Grange requests funding every 6 months. I really think the Metodo 3 and Oakley International figures are well inflated. I also find it very hard to believe Operation Grange is actually spending £350,000 on a 4 officers investigation for 6 months. There's nothing in my opinion that can justify the money requested to the spending. The starting salary for police constables in England, Wales and Northern Ireland is between around £20,000 and £24,000 per year, rising to £40,000 at the top of the scale, achievable after about 7 years. The range of salaries for sergeants is around £41,000 to £45,000. Inspectors can earn between around £51,000 and £55,000, or between £53,000 and £58,000 in London, rising to between around £56,000 and £59,000 for chief inspectors, between £59,000 to £61,000 in London, right? So if you look at this, even if you would have 4 of the highest paid police officers, the inspectors, as you can see the figure there, which you don't have on Operation Grange, it still doesn't make up the amount for 6 months. It doesn't. The figures I have shown you are salaries for 1 year. 1 year salaries. So you would need to divide that into 6 months. So it would be half of the figures I showed you. Either way you try to work it out, it just doesn't add up. And this is every 6 months. And more money are requested every 6 months. Major Rose was also one of the few senior military figures calling for Blair's impeachment over his handling of the war in Iraq. It didn't, however, stop the Tory peer from capitalizing on the invasion through a series of lucrative contracts won by Control Risks Group. Control Risks Group was founded in 1975 by Timothy Royal as a subsidiary of Hogg Robinson, the corporate travel giant and rival to companies like Mark Warner. Several of the veterans have also worked at Oakley International and Kroll Inc., the private security firm in charge of security at the World Trade Center at the time of 9/11. Lobbying records show Patton Boggs represents foreign governments and corporations. The Patton Boggs Political Action Committee and Thomas Bogg also made significant contributions to the re-election of Senator Richard Shelby. One of several senior figures Jerry McCann met in Washington to discuss support for the U.S. search for Madeleine. Shelby served on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence from 1995 to 2003 under Clinton and Bush respectively. In 2004, a federal investigation concluded that Shelby had leaked classified information to Rupert Murdoch's Fox News regarding two rather dubious messages picked up by the National Security Agency. Shelby's election campaign was also financially supported by Kinetic North America, the company chaired by the UK's Baroness Neville Jones, friend of Sarah Hogg, whose 3i Investments company supports Brian Kennedy. Kinetic North America's executive vice president, Tom Weston, sits on the advisory panel of Excalibur, with senior counsel to Patton Boggs, John Breaux. Excalibur, as on their website, and I quote, "Since 1992, Excalibur's information technology consulting services have assisted clients ranging from the Department of Defense and National Cancer Institute to non-profits and corporations to operate more efficiently, preserve capital, and increase productivity and revenues. Excalibur solutions for health sciences, enterprise-level reporting, educational programs, grant management, and budget and financial management prove that technology can be developed and delivered on time." End of quote. In return for Kinetic's support, Senator Shelby awarded the private security and intelligence firm a contract worth $8 million to provide work on behalf of the U.S. Army Aviation and Missile Research, Development and Engineering Center. Patton Boggs and Thomas Boggs also supported the election campaigns of Democrat Congressman Nick Lampson, another of the officials and advisors Jerry met in Washington. The third and most important member of the dignitaries Jerry met in Washington was Alberto Gonzales, at that time Attorney General of the United States government. Oh boy, this is so twisted. It's getting more and more twisted by the minute. Patton Boggs' colonel and John Garrett and Kevin Halligan's best man at his wedding was able to arrange private briefings with Gonzales during his time as advisor at the White House, and it's possible that Jerry's invitation to the White House was managed through Garrett's links with Control Risks. During his visit at the White House, another Patton Boggs associate, Colin M. Newman, functioned as a liaison to the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, also known as the 9/11 Commission, and participated in a number of high-level government investigations, serving at the White House as a legal aid to Alberto Gonzales. Bell Pottinger, who provided crisis management services on behalf of the McCanns and Mark Warner, represented Trafigura, the company bringing charges against Halligan over a failure to honor a contract. Carter Rock provided legal assistance to the Swiss-based company. Another guest at Halligan's wedding was Noel Koch, the former United States Assistant Secretary of Defense and after advisor to Barack Obama. Koch was a leading voice in calls for regime change in Iraq ahead of the first Gulf War. Koch later said, and I quote, "No one had any doubts about the Iraqis' continuous involvement in terrorism. The real reason was to help them succeed in the war against Iran." End of quote. In 2013, Kevin Richard Halligan, Irish citizen, pled guilty to wire fraud, a federal charge stemming from a scheme in which he defrauded $2.1 million from a Netherlands-based commodities trading company. Announced United States Attorney Ronald C. Mccann Jr. and Valerie Parlav, Assistant Director in charge of the FBI's Washington field office. Halligan pled guilty to one count of wire fraud, the first two counts of an indictment that was returned against him in 2009 in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. As part of the plea agreement, the government agreed to dismiss the second count of the indictment, which was a money laundering charge stemming from the same scheme. The charge of wire fraud carries a statutory maximum of 20 years in prison and a fine up to $250,000. Under federal sentencing guidelines, the parties agreed that Halligan's likely range would be a prison term of 33 to 41 months and a fine between $7,500 and $75,000. Under the plea agreement, Halligan also must pay $2.1 million in restitution to the company that was the victim of his scheme. The Honorable Colleen Kohler-Cottley scheduled sentencing for June 27, 2013. The wire fraud charge stems from actions taken by Halligan in 2006 and 2007 when he was the Chief Executive Officer of Red Defense International, a London-based security consulting and crisis management firm which was hired by Trafigura Beheer, a Netherlands-based international commodities trading company, and its London-based law firm Watterson Hicks. Kevin Halligan was employed by the McCanns from March 2008 and ended the contract early in September 2008. The blood-soaked corpse of Kevin has been found at his mansion in January 2018. Police launched an investigation. A former colleague told Mail Online, and I quote, "The house was covered in blood, but apparently that was from Kevin falling down so much. His body is now in the morgue. The police are looking into it." End of quote. A source who knew Kevin said he was a boozer and drink was inevitably his downfall. Oh my god. This again was another very long video again, but I'm hoping well worth watching. So I need to ask, who believes his death was his own doing, as in accidental? Do we believe that? Let me know in the comments below. I don't know, I really don't know, but of course there's always a but I find out in this case. I'm thinking, this man, he knew loads of people, public figures and so on. He got involved in politics, business, money laundering, etc. You name it, he did it. With this type of involvement comes information, and a lot of it. The more people he got involved with, the more he knew. And not necessarily something everyone else knew. Maybe potentially state secrets, something which shouldn't come out, some big and wide scams. Which leads me to believe his death was not accidental. I think that he knew too much and drinking. I think he knew too much and drinking, as we know he did. Someone was probably concerned that he would open his mouth drunk to someone he shouldn't. Better yet, he might have tried blackmailing someone. I don't think this is far-fetched at all. And I'm not surprised. Nothing surprises me anymore in this case. I managed to find out too much information to believe at this stage the accidental death and cover-up of Madeleine Mccann. I think this is much bigger than we can possibly even imagine. You see, I'm talking about stuff which I had no idea I'll come across. I had no idea. Nuclear power plants, nuclear weapons, genetics, the US, the UK, defense, DNA, aerospace, travel agencies, which are supposed to be just travel agencies. But I think in this case, Mark Warner, as a travel agency, is just a cover. This is my opinion. You guys can laugh at it or you guys can think on it. And for God's sake, I even talked about 9/11. How did I even get to the point where I'm talking about 9/11 in a missing child's case? It's unbelievable. All these things lead me much, much further than a simple case of a child disappearance. This I believe is the mother lode of cover-ups. Big time, big time. I'm more inclined to believe it's actually a case of nuclear weapons, world domination, genetics, gene modification, the perfect human, the perfect soldier, DNA modification. I'm just seeing so many connections which lead me in all sorts of directions that I'm actually getting confused. And perhaps this is the point. Perhaps this is what they are trying to achieve, to get someone so confused that they drop questioning and that they stop looking into more detail into it. I mean, you see, I keep saying to my husband, right, because I'm investigating this almost on a daily basis for my research, and I keep telling my husband, I found this and then I found this, and the more I go into it, the more I dig, the deeper I get. And the deeper I get, is like the more, I don't know, tunnels, if you will, I find. You know, it's this company, then it's got a subsidiary, then that subsidiary is the subsidiary of something else, then that belongs to a different company, and then that different company belongs to yet another company, and so on. And as you can tell, it sort of goes from here to here to here to here. It sort of goes in circles, and you know, you can't manage to seem to break that link somewhere and to find the answer, because I think that this answer doesn't want to be found. And that's why it has been done in such a way that the more you look, the more confused you get, and the more you look and the more you find out, the less sense it makes. This is a huge, this is a Herculean cover-up, if you will. I don't know if I'm using Herculean in the right context, but anyway, gigantic. This is a gigantic cover-up. It is, in my opinion. I don't know, guys. What do you think? What do you think? Please let me know down in the comments below. Many thanks for watching, and many thanks for watching. Take care and stay safe. This month I'm also doing a few Halloween inspired videos apart from the usual Madeleine Mccann investigation, so stay tuned and make sure you check all my other videos as well. It's amazing, it's great, it's Halloween month. Alright guys, take care and stay safe. Bye bye.